Thank you all for joining. Today we're going to be talking about a trending topic lately through the latest changes in the world as how to really perform and work well in a remote world. Just to give you a background, a little bit of myself, I work as a product manager in Eventbrite, where I have the chance to really work remotely for three teams that we work in the same country but in different locations. And I do have stakeholders in San Francisco, and also I work with other teams that are based in Nashville. So basically, I'm really used to working with teams that are in different locations. My previous background, I work as a consultant, and also I headed product in different startups where I've always lived the experience of working remotely, either in having teams in Argentina, India, Romania, Spain, being in the US. So I've had a chance to really see different environments where remote work was a necessity. Just so you know, prior to really all these COVID things happen, I already talked to product school because I wanted to talk about how to work remotely. So this was an idea that I started a little earlier. The main things are how to really set up the right communication channels. I think that when you're working remotely, communication is key for success. And in any industry, in any type of work, communication is key. But when you're working remotely, doing the things right and clear and measuring can really be a big difference. In addition, I'll explain certain differences between the work that you do as a PM when you're working remotely and when you are not working remotely, but very focused on things that I do on my remote teams. And then in addition, how really to make your team great when it's a remote team. So certain things and tips that can help you improve the steps, processes, and things for your team. So let's go over it. So the first thing that I'm going to be talking about is people and culture, because any team in any type of industry that you work for, the team is what really going to make the difference. And you as a product manager working in product, your team will really be the ones that accomplish the goals that you have and the vision that you're trying to lead on that. So when you're working remotely, there are certain things that you need to take into account when you're hiring new people or when you're deciding who is joining that team, in a remote environment. And there are certain things that definitely are important in a non-remote world, but can be really, really key in a remote environment. So talking about it, one of the things is like they need to be goal oriented. We're working in an environment where there are a lot of more like time flexibility. Teams will not have a time to start, time to end, or anything like that. They need to be people that like to work based on goals. And those goals, you can do it whenever you want. But in a remote world, you will need to be making sure that the goals are really clear defined and that you are a person that likes to have those goals and accomplish them on the time that you provided. Communication is not only key. Over communication in a remote world is even more important. Sometimes you think that telling something, you're maybe repeating it too much, but it's important to have people that even over communicate, say the things 3 times, 4 times, but people that ensure that what you're trying to communicate, the rest of the people understand it, because they're not facing to each other. They're probably discussing once or twice a day. And it's really important to have this. Another important and key thing is really building a trust relationship. And you need to trust anyone in your team because you're probably not seeing them the rest of the day. So building trust from the very beginning is also very important. Trust doesn't need to be earned. You start trusting people. If not, it will not work. And then as last thing, I think as a very important quality is being proactive. When you're working with the people around you, you can see a lot of the things that are happening surrounding you. But when you're by yourself and you're home, you need to be proactive, to be asking the right questions, to be finding who knows that thing that you need to know. And that I really value a lot. So those 4 skills to me make really people to succeed in a remote environment. But what is really remote work, or when do we really work remotely? No, so remote work is not working from home. No, remote work is really being in different places, and this actually have its cons and pros depending on where you are. So I'm going to talk a little bit, and based on my experiences in different situations that you can see as a product manager. And that not only depends on you remotely, but also on the stakeholders and the team. And by the team, I mean UX, UI, I mean the engineers, I mean the data team, QA if you have it, anyone that is helping you succeed on what you're building as a product. So first possibility is that all the team is working remotely. When all the team is working remotely, there are certain great things. So you have a lot of flexibility. People can basically work at whenever they want. You can just sync up on different times and so on. And it's easier to determine clear communication channels because everyone is remotely, so everyone will follow all the remote interactions that you're applying or all the rules that you guys as a team define to be followed. As a cons sometimes is that the fact that you are not next to each other and the fact that you are probably only talking to your team makes that sometimes co-creation or new ideas don't happen as often as if you're working in an office environment where maybe an engineer can run into another engineer from another team and discuss how they solved something. This is sometimes not happening as often in an all remote team remote. That's why when you're all remote teams, you really need to enforce to have communication across teams. You need to have more like product meetings, engineer meetings that just discuss how things are doing, people to share and collaborate deeper because they are not seeing each other. And you don't need to do it, you shouldn't do it only engineers to engineers. You need to combine as much as possible any type of like person that belongs to your company, because that will really, really create and provide new ideas and many things that will make your company go to the next level. Something that I find really, really important, not only for when all team is remote, but for all of them, but when all the team is remote is even more important, is having the team working agreements. The first thing I do when I start with a new team is defining what are the working agreements, how this team is going to work, how this team is going to communicate, how other teams are going to communicate with this team, what are the mission, how is the product manager going to interact with the team, how the engineer manager is going to lead this team. Having a working agreements document that it's live and iterate amongst time is critical. This is not a document that you sign off, you do it and that's it. You need to understand how the team is evolving, the needs of that team. And each team will have its own and will be different, but will help you determine how you're going to be doing the things. Things that are important to really care on that one are like, what's the cadence of the meetings that you're going to be doing? What's the ownership and the responsibility of the team? How often you're going to be doing retrospectives and what type of retrospectives are you doing? Where the discussions should happen, and also allow some spacing for like chill and have fun and get to know each other, because you're all remote. So you need to find ways to really create that team collectivity that makes you work even better than being close in and together. Another possibility, and this is a case that I do have right now, is basically being a full remote PM, where you're basically full remote, but the other people are not remote. I'm sure that some of you may have experienced that part, where you as a PM are hired, but then the engineers, the UI team, the stakeholders are everyone in certain offices, and you act as a remote PM. So obviously, as I was mentioning before, you have flexibility, you really are basically can manage your own time and things like that. However, one of the key things that you need to consider if you are a full remote PM, but the teams are not remote, is the information that you can miss in what we call like corridor conversations, like coffee conversations, so that people can talk and interact and start new ideas and solving problems, and you do not know it and you're not part of that. This is why when you're a full remote PM, it's so important to state where the discussion should happen, where the communication should happen, so that if there is any type of like conversation that can impact in your roadmap, people will need to sort of like document it or add it or get the questions, but get you involved on that. So it's super important for the PM to really ensure that this happens. Another possibility is, and this one I'm really familiar at it right now, is to be a PM that it's next to the stakeholders, but the team is full remote. Mainly probably the engineering team, maybe the design team or research team. So you basically have your closer next to the business team, and you're working with them, and that not only gives you flexibility, but it also adds you a lot of like context on the company situation. It places you in a position where you have very close decision makers, not only on the product side but on the business side and so on. So that actually helps you in certain things and can make you grow as a PM, but you are not next to the team. So involving the team and making sure that the team gets a good amount of the context that you're getting, providing the right information to them, it's really important in this particular case. We're thinking in a way where you as a PM are next to the stakeholders, but all the team is working remotely. So there is where you really need to give that extra step to make sure that the team creates connectivity and that they do not lose the focus. No? But another possibility is that you work with stakeholders, you're next to the stakeholders, and the team is remote for you, but not remote for them. So basically they're working in a different office. I think this is a very common case that you are maybe in a country where you're working, but the engineering team is in a different country. And they are close to each other. So that's perfect for them because they can communicate, they can do pair programming close to each other and things that can help you a lot. But, and you have the context, so you know that you're closer to the decision maker and so on. And this is a position where you need to take in consideration certain things now. The team involvement and basically giving them the context that they don't have, it's key, as in the previous case. But there are other things that can apply. So there are things and challenges like time differences or language barrier. So if sometimes that happens that they speak a different language because they're in a different country, or they have like 8 hours overlay, and basically it makes it really hard to communicate often, to be close to each other. So those are challenges that later on we're going to see some examples and what we have to do. And obviously another thing that can happen is that the team is together, the engineering team is together, and you are in a different place. So you need to ensure, this is very important, that you do not miss information or there's no any type of conversation that changes anything and you are not aware of that. So let's talk about daily routines as a remote PM. And some of them are basically the same things that you could do even if you are not remote, but just taking care of a few things more importantly when you are in a remote environment. So one of the clear things that I was mentioning earlier was setting up the right communication channels. And what does this mean? So there are many different types of conversations that you, the stakeholders, your team has. And there are many different places where you can hold those conversations. So imagine that someone finds something that needs to be changed in the code, and they start discussing in a GitHub thread. And you as a PM never looked at the GitHub changes that they do, and you do not even realize the change they did. This is a situation that should never happen. So basically the important thing is to really state what type of conversations should happen where. The engineering team should discuss any type of like coding changes that do not affect the product inside any, like, for instance, in a GitHub, in the GitHub code, in a pull request, or it's going to be in a Jira ticket. So if it's in a Jira ticket, it's traceable. Anyone can see it, and then you can have the historic. So if anyone else could come, they could see it. Or you've built a document where the product requirements are written and people are commenting based on comments. There is no a really good answer of where to do it, but the important thing is that you as a PM knows where all type of conversations are happening. And the important thing is that you keep consistency on that. Because if you don't do it, you will miss information, there will be problems and miscommunication issues that sometimes leads us to really big errors. In terms of like how to, what different can you do a sprint, being in a remote or not remote? I really don't see much a difference. There are certain things that I really do different. Like I try to do the dailies of my sprints. I do different because in the remote team, I don't see them. So I try to spend a few minutes just, you know, saying like, how do you feel? How's your week going? Getting to know each other, because I think that create that trust and transparency and really gets you close to the team. And I think it's really helpful. If it's in a team that you see every day, it's easier. You can go grab a coffee with them, you see them, no? And that type of feeling and those minor things I think are really important, no? And the way that we approach retrospectives on a remote team are a little different, because we always have remote as something centric, so that we know the things that we need to like improve. And sometimes we focus on that, no? On the conversations, the communications, and what we're following. Something that it's very useful for me is sharing a task list. So basically, aside of my Jira boards and so on, I always have a Trello board with the tasks that I'm doing. Since the remote teams don't see me, they don't know which conversation I'm having or who am I meeting with or what things I'm doing. Normally with the engineering managers or the tech leads, I share basically the things that I'm working on, so they can really add things to my list of tasks, and they can basically add context of what I'm doing. Sometimes like they don't really know what you're working on or what you're trying to achieve, or if you're writing a document or so on. So having them understand that and reading that, it's helpful, no? The things that you're doing. And then one thing that I mentioned earlier, but I want to state it again, is over communicate. You have to say the things twice, 3 times, 4 times, 5 times, as many as needed, so that people have things clear. You are not there to see what they're doing, so that make sure that they understood. For that, good practices are just repeating what you just said, summarize, create action items in a document that everyone can follow up on the things that you requested, and try to let people respond if they understood, and let them repeat what you just said, so that you can see that they understood when there is something that it's a bit complicated and so on. So let's talk a little bit about time management and communication. What do I do different in remotely and not remote? No, in reality, many of these things I'm managing it similar, but there's some slight difference on this one. No, the calendar. So to me, I guess that for most of you, my calendar is sort of my life. No, and if you look at my calendar, I'm busy from early in the morning to late in the evenings, and people have a hard time to book a slot on my calendar. However, things that I consider critical are, if I have an available slot in my calendar, that's available. So that means that I keep my calendar up to date every day. Even though if I have something that, I don't know, I need to do, and anything that it's not work related, and I need to take like a 30 minutes break, I'm going to put it on my calendar so that people know when I'm accessible, when I'm not, when they require me, so they can request time from me. And having the calendar updated really makes you available for your team. And anything, if you really need time for you, if you need time to work, basically, because you need time with no meetings, just block it. Block time, say that I'm busy working on wherever, or just put busy, but make sure that your calendar is up to date. This is critical to really make people knowing when they can get time from you, so that they don't get, like, oh, the PM is always busy, I can never have like 20 minutes. I try to talk to him, but he's never available. If you have your calendar up to date, you can see that. Another thing that I do with my calendar is analyze it. So after the week happens, so I see how many meetings I really attended, what type of meetings I did, which ones I finished earlier, and so on. That helps me trying to manage my time a little better. Another thing that I find very useful is to do asynchronous meetings. So convert meetings that normally we do synchronously, like we do together, and convert it into async meetings. When this can be helpful. So if you are working with a remote team that it's in a completely different time difference, so in a different time zone, and you are like 6 hours ahead or wherever, you can do your dailies in a synchronous mode. So you can just type on your Slack, today I did this, had these issues, today I will finish this. Basically converting into an asynchronous meetings, make sure that people continue and is constant on what they're doing, but they are not forced to either stay late or doing it in a completely different times. You just give them flexibility and you get what you want. However, as I was mentioning before, doing async dailies doesn't mean do not meet your team at all. You need to find time for talking to them, to see how they're evolving. But you can convert certain meetings. You could even do a retrospective asynchronously. So you create a form, people respond to it, and then you will do either a meeting at the end and put all the responses, or collect it, summarize it, and just do it with your team. No, work, collaborate with them. There are many things that can convert from a synchronous mode to an asynchronous mode. The email, to me, the email is key because I don't, to be honest, I don't like much working with the email because I think that people sometimes overuse it and use it for things that may not be as useful as having like either direct conversation in channels and so on. How do I use my email, or how do I try to use my email efficiently? First, I state clear with everyone when I'm going to be sending an email and what type of emails I do send. No, emails that are involved a lot of people, that do not belong to a certain channel, that for some reason you want to like keep the context because it's a long text or anything. And then knowing that I have like people that are in different, let's say, groups or anything, so that I can collect it in an email. Any other thing that I can directly talk through any type of like channel that I have in our private chat or anything, that will be replaced by an email. No, an email, we use it just to keep it a long time ago so that you can reread it, adding certain requirements and so on. But it's important to not overuse the email too much when you're talking about internal things. When you're talking about external clients, users, etc., definitely you need to use your email. Documentation. So basically, in general, I think that documentation is key for any PM role. And my ideal situation is to not document too much, but not document too little. So basically finding that balance that if you stop doing what you're doing and someone else arrive to where you are, can read that documentation easily and can start working easily too. So if you can reach that amount of information, this is where you really want to be spotted. Sometimes we try to document too much, and then we realize that someone else is trying to read that, it gets complicated. And sometimes we forget to do it. So I think that basically what we need to think at all times is when you're doing any type of decision, when you're doing your roadmap, when you're trying to decide whether to do this feature, or any work that you're doing, try to document it. Make it simple and clear, but make sure that someone else can read it, and make sure that you always follow the same patterns to where to start, etc. And then, well, in terms of like prioritization of your own work, I really don't change anything for my prioritization on working remotely or not remotely. So that part, I consider that it's basically the same type of priority. Something interesting is like how and where to do a brainstorming or a sprint or design sprint or anything like that. Those type of things that really I feel that are improved when you guys are all in person, all in one room, closed for a few hours, and great things happen, are really hard to replicate in a remote environment. My advice, if you cannot do at all an in-person brainstorming, is to really limit it to a very, very few people. So I would say like 3 to 4 maximum, because if you start having more people, you will have one person talking, a couple of them looking at their cell phones, and bored, because it's really hard to have a 5, 6, 7 really people providing ideas and so on in a remote conversation. You ended up having a couple of them talking and the rest watching, or sometimes not even paying attention. So I really think that are important, but let's try to divide them into smaller groups so that they can, if groups of 2, 3, and then maybe put the ideas together. If you have a team of 6 people, divide it in 3 groups of 2 or 2 groups of 3, and then once they have some ideas, put them together and do a final meeting on that. The perfect outcome of a retrospective is in a remote world is something that teaches you something, and something that gives you an actionable item. So really, 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 really try to get, if you as a PM are part of the retrospectives, try to get action items for the next sprints that are related to how you guys are working. If there are no items, probably means that you're missing something, because you're never going to be performing perfectly. So that I'm sure that every few weeks you need to have things that need to be improved. And in terms of like the time management and communication, to me, it helps me a lot to define where the conversation should be. Something that I do is that if I'm working on something, I know where to look at. So I don't do the opposite. I don't go to my email, Confluence page, my Google Docs comments, the Jira tickets. And so I don't do that, like looking for all of those so that I see if I find the news or I find comments or anything like that. I do the opposite. What am I working on? I'm working on this. Where do we talk about this? In this Jira ticket. So I go to that Jira ticket. This actually helps me a lot to manage my time efficiently. And then something that I think that every PM needs to do very often, but sometimes I find that it's hard, is saying no. You cannot do everything. Sometimes people say that we're like mini CEOs of our own part of the product. We have to say no very often. And when you're working remotely, you need to feel that trust. You need to feel that connectivity so that you can easily say no to something that you really don't have bandwidth for or that you cannot do. So something that I find interesting is like, how can you make your remote team great? No? And what's, as a PM, like what's your responsibility to make your team great? No? What can you do for that? So I think things that I find really, really interesting and things that I find really important are, first of all, is like provide feedback. In general, I love providing feedback and receiving feedback. And I think this is a practice that you need to do and you need to do often. And by often, I mean very often. Like it cannot be every quarter when you're doing the reviews or every twice a year. It needs to be more often. You need to be understanding if your decisions are impacting, and you need to be asking, because sometimes you arrive to the grooming session, you tell them what you want as a PM, and then you set up your camera, and then they start thinking, oh, why did they say that, or things like that. So you do not get the feedback, or you do not get what people are feeling. So if you create an environment where you really provide constructive and good and actionable feedback, and they do it to you, I think that's like vital to make a great team. Another thing is to define the clear product boundaries. So understanding for the team, what's their limit? What are they trying to do? What's the mission for that team? This is really important. And again, over communicate it. Remind all the time to the team what the OKRs of the company and the OKRs or the goals for the team are, and the mission. This is very important because they need to know and they need to feel that what they're doing is really changing the world. It's changing the product. So this is very important. Review your working agreements often. I was mentioning before, it's an iterative document. It's something that needs to guide the way that you guys work. But it is not something set on a stone. Like you need to be adapting it to changes and to things that you learn. In addition, you need to be making sure that the retrospective items that happen occur. Maybe it's not your responsibility that they occur, but try to push as much as you can so that those things happen to make your remote team great. Another thing that happens sometimes is that we have so many things to do that we become the bottleneck for the team. This should become your first priority. As PMs, we should never become the bottleneck of the team. Regardless of our tasks, we need to make sure that we're not blocking the team on anything. Try to find a solution, try to tell them to move on another thing, but do not become the bottleneck because you don't have time for solving a problem or taking a final decision or so on. And as a final thing is, I think it's critical to create an environment of trust, communication, and transparency with each one of the team members that you work with. And sometimes this requires you extra time. This requires you to have more conversations, to get to know each other and things like that. But I think that really, really makes a difference. Because if you start getting that connection with your team, you will be making your work and they will be making their work much better. So just to finalize, I wanted to give you some examples and tell you a few stories of my previous experience and issues that happen, no? That applies in this remote world as a PM. So the first one that I wanted to talk about is the moment where I was working in my previous company, and I was leading product, and I transitioned from a city, Valencia, to Madrid, and business, marketing, and strategy moved to Madrid, and engineering stayed in Valencia. And the whole engineering team remained over there, while all the stakeholders, decisions, and so on were in Madrid. A little bit what happened is that there were a bit of a changes. So at the beginning, The cadence of the meetings were different. We didn't know when people were available. We had a hard time to find a spot. It was a little bit complicated to really manage certain things. But the good thing is that we had already created a good culture of work. So we knew each other very well. We were like, we built that trust environment and transparency. So it was thanks to the culture creation and the fact that we work really well as a team, made us really simple to adapt our communication. This is what we did. We adapted the way that we were communicating. We were reducing drastically the meetings, the short conversations, solving the questions like once a week, so on. So we adapted certain things to really solve and working as a remote team great. And then one thing we did is to enforcing like closing friendly connections. So we started before, when we were together, we actually didn't go to like grab a beer, almost never. But when we started working remotely, we started doing that, even virtually, or sometimes just doing like offsites and meeting more often. And that really helped because we were not eating together. We were not spending as much time, and that helped us keeping that time of like fluent conversations. Another case that happened and I've experienced is that in two teams sort of like working together, but two engineering teams in two different locations with two different time zones and two different languages. What happened is that the lead of the engineering team on one part didn't feel comfortable speaking another language. And what it was happening is that the questions were not asked, and the meetings that we were doing with the two teams were really useless. And I didn't really know what to do because it was a hard thing. Like first, I don't know if it's my responsibility over there. Secondly, I'm not responsible if someone is not feeling comfortable with the language. And then definitely for the time difference, half of the team couldn't join. So in the end, it was really a nightmare. And there were a lot of important conversations that were happening over there. So it was a hard thing. So we did the following. We first reduced the cadence of the meetings. So we were doing it daily. And it was basically at the very beginning reduced from like 5 days a week to 1 day a week, and later on to 2 days a week. I did something that changed a lot. It was like preparing an agenda in every meeting. So we like sum up all the questions, both teams put the questions. And then during the conversation, I shared the doc with all the questions and I was typing the answers. That helped a lot. So everyone was like following what we were doing, understanding the reason of the meeting, what we wanted to get out of that, and getting some action items. Because at the end, I did a recap of the conversation and enforcing that a plan of action was needed. So writing certain action items to do that for the next meeting that we had. Another situation that I experienced is that when the roles in a squad are not well defined, and that happens sometimes. It's mainly when you're starting in a squad, no, and you don't know who has to do what, who's responsible to do the meetings, no, who owns the retrospective, the planning, the grooming, the dailies, who needs to lead that, who needs to be really ensuring that things happen as in the working agreements, no? Is it the PM? Is it the tech lead? Is it the engineering manager? Is anybody in the team that wants? Should we change? I've tried many different things, and there is no good answer. There is no good case. But something that I feel is that in finding a team lead, someone that really leads that, doesn't necessarily need to be the engineering manager, the tech lead, or anything like that. But someone that naturally can lead that helps a lot. In my experience, when I've had someone who really wanted to like be leading that part and enjoy that, that helped a lot to really keep the cadence and so on. So that if you're lucky and have that type of leader in your team, empower that natural leader, giving them the ability to be leading and ensuring that things happen as stated for the team. And another one that I wanted to share, just based on what I was saying, is like what happens when conversations don't happen in the right communication channel if you didn't set it up correctly. So that I experienced a case where people were discussing about product requirements in a pull request in the code. And they were having never-ending discussions. And second, they were having never-ending discussions where I had no idea that they were happening. Why did this happen? It happened because it was not super clear where they had to have these type of conversations. And if everyone is aware of that, they would have moved that to a Jira ticket or the Slack channel, or having a meeting directly with product. Basically, after those conversations that were like, obviously they were not going to come up with a solution because that solution came from product, and they needed that, but they were just discussing, no, I think that a product said this, and product said that. The way that we changed that after we saw that is like, it was one of the teams where it was like really critical to define when a conversation should happen to another place, no, and where we're talking about A, or we are moving really to talk to B, so that we need to move the conversation to where B needs to live. And that really helped a lot in team efficiency, not only for this particular case, but it helped in general to all communication. So one of the weaknesses of that team was the communication. And now I can probably say that this team is working great in terms of like communication. So just to finalize, what I would like you to get from, it's a general overview and a high level of working remotely. But what I'd like you to remind you is to really, it's critical when you're working in a remote environment, regardless of how remote it is, to really set up your communication channels where you're going to be discussing what. And doing that and being very resilient on that and persistent on that, making sure that everyone follows it. And it needs to be something that the whole team or everyone needs to be part of that decision, but making sure that you follow that will help your team succeed a lot. I hope that you saw some interesting cases of like difference between remote and no remote. Basically, there are certain things that are similar completely in my particular case, and things that are slightly different, and things that are completely different. And then I hope that you guys got some really great tips on how you can make your remote team great, so that next week you can start really applying it and using some of the tips that I provided. So thank you so much, and I hope that you enjoyed it, and feel free to ask me any questions if you have.